Welcome back, everybody, to section 2 of ZOO3649 Evolutionary Genetics. And in this section, we're going to be talking basically about the two ideas, the two main ideas, okay, that has shaped our understanding of biology. Okay, and these are the ideas of Darwin, the idea of evolution by natural selection, and the idea and all the other ideas that that's brought together with the other main idea, which is the idea of inheritance by Mendel. Darwin figured out why everything was perfectly adapted to its environment. Mendel discovered how things were passed, how we pass on information to the next generation, to our kids, and how they pass information to their kids. And that is what's called inheritance. Darwin didn't know how that happened. Okay, Darwin speculated about how that happened, but he didn't know. And so these two big ideas are what we're going to discuss in this section, and it's going to lead to the next section, which basically brings the two ideas, synthesizes the two ideas into what we call the modern synthesis. But let's talk about these ideas, and you've been through these ideas in 2544 last year, but I'm going to repeat them and we're going to have a lot more detail. So please get your brains in gear. We're not going to slow down for you if you don't have your brain in gear. All right? So our first lecture in this section is going to be about natural selection. So we know about this. We've had this lecture in 2544. And the open question was what? At the time of Darwin, there was no natural explanation for why any organism, whether it's a plant or a mosquito or a tree or a human or a buffalo or a cow or a cat, why do they appear to be perfectly suited to their environment? Now, if you are observant, if you're the kind of person that looks and doesn't see, you're not observant. If you look out of the window and you don't see that there are 5 different kinds of trees, if you don't see that these cats that I'm looking at, they're not all the same, they look different. If you go up to Masisi side and you see baobab trees, you're seeing them, but are you observing them? Do you know why they're there? Or is it just in one and out the other and no thought has gone through? If you are such a person, you're going to find science extremely difficult. Okay? You have got to be someone who can observe. Yeah? If you are just looking but not seeing, forget about science. Okay? You need to be able to look at these pictures and see and appreciate that animals, the bird, when it is diving like this for fish, how is it shaped? How is it making its body shaped? Is it making its body in the normal way of flight? It's not. Because if it did that and it hits the water at 200 kilometers an hour, it would die. So how is it making the shape of its body? It's making the shape of its body like a missile, like a bullet. So when it hits the water, it moves, still goes through the water, and finds the fish meters below. How did they become perfectly suited like little missiles? How did that happen? Didn't happen by creation, if that's what you're thinking. Forget it. That's yesterday's news. You cannot be in third year genetics if you're still thinking that nonsense. Okay? They are perfectly suited to this environment. Can you even see the chameleon here? Here he is. Here he is. He looks just like a dry leaf. How did that happen? Not by accident. Okay? How did it happen that the giraffe can reach this top leaves here? No other animal, maybe an elephant, but even an elephant cannot reach that. How did the giraffe become perfectly suited to its environment? And as you all know, William Paley could not handle the data. He could not handle the data. He could not see any proper explanation. Okay? So his mind, because our minds need explanations, he found a fake explanation. Okay? He tried to say that he don't get me wrong. William Paley observed. He observed that organisms are perfectly suited to the environment. He observed this. So he was halfway to becoming a scientist. Most of you are not observing. You don't even have what Paley had. And Paley was wrong. He was able to observe and still he came up with the wrong solution. So make no mistake, William Paley was able to observe, and he was able to observe very well. He knew that there was perfectly suited animals for their environment. He knew this, and he wanted to find an answer, but he couldn't. So what did he do? He took the easy way out, the shortcut, and said, someone must have created it. Okay? Just like you see, someone has created this watch, and inside the watch there's so many small different mechanisms, each perfectly made by a watchmaker. Okay? So he said, well, life is just the same. It's so many small things perfectly made for the environment. It must have been created by something, an entity, a divine entity. Okay? William Paley, as we all know, was sorely and embarrassingly wrong. Okay? Because his theory did not take into account the 5 main developments of human thinking. Okay? He went back to supernatural. Okay? So here William Paley was wrong. He failed. His answer failed in every one of these 5 criteria for determining what is true and what is not. Okay? So he failed. Big fail for William Paley. The next guy who came along came with another theory. But this theory was a biological theory. So Lamarck was also a big observer. He also realized, how did the giraffe become so perfectly suited to those big trees? Yeah, it could reach, get the leaves without even trying. How did that happen? Lamarck said, throughout the giraffe's lifetime, he will stretch a bit. Tomorrow he stretches a bit more, next week a bit more, and with the stretching he becomes bigger and taller and taller and taller, and he's able to reach the tall trees. But we all know that this is also incorrect, because if your hand gets chopped off when your baby is born, does it have a chopped off hand? No, it doesn't. It has a full 2 hands. So what you acquire during your lifetime cannot be evolved. You cannot evolve. You have to give it to the next generation. And only if there's a change in the next generation does evolution happen, right? And it happens in that population when you can measure the change from one generation to the next. So Lamarck did come with a biological explanation. Okay, so he was taking into account natural history. He was realizing that the world was old, because Lamarck's theory requires a long time, right? Time after time, slowly, the neck gets slowly bigger. You need a long time for the neck to become very big. So Lamarck realized the world was very old. Okay? He realized that the world changes. He was able to separate reality from fiction, natural from supernatural. However, when it came to testing his theory, it failed. Okay? You must be able to test a theory, a hypothesis. Otherwise, it's just hot air that you're talking. No one's going to believe you unless they are even less clever than you are. The only way you will convince people when things are not true is when they don't understand. The people you're convincing don't understand. But unfortunately, as soon as you do understand that, then you realize the truth has to have all these elements. Okay? The truth cannot be lacking even one. So Lamarck, fail. And then came Mr. Darwin. Okay, Mr. Darwin was an interesting character. Okay, here he's pictured as a young man. He figured out that the perfect fit between organisms and their environment was gained through a process which he called natural selection, where nature undergoes a continuous struggle for life. Okay? During this struggle, the lesser suited ones are destroyed, they die. The better suited ones, they survive. And that's as simple as it is. That's all there is to it. Natural selection means if you are not suited well to your environment, you're going to die. If you are suited, you will survive. Okay? So that finally explains why, if you are at the top of your game, you live. If you're not at the top of your game, you die. And evolution forgets about you. All right. So, yes, natural selection needs to make use of biology and natural history. It needs the world to be very old. The world has to change, because then the struggle continues. You can test it. Every single biological test, every single experiment in the lab that has ever been done in the history of biology has proven this theory of Darwin's to be correct. So no ignorant person who doesn't know anything can say, this is all nonsense. It is tested, it is proven, and it is fact. You need to understand this to pass this module. Okay? And the separation between reality and fiction, this is what Darwin was able to do. So, by doing this, he pulled our understanding of the natural world away from a situation where nothing makes sense. You have to memorize everything. With natural selection, Darwin said, you don't have to memorize anything. Just you have to understand how this works, how the evolution works, and then everything else makes complete sense. And 100 years after that, who said that? Theodosius Dobzhansky said that. Nothing in biology is making sense unless there is evolution. Okay? So what were the 4 tenets of evolution? Yeah? The 4 tenets were variation, inheritance, high rate of population growth, and differential survival and reproduction. We are going to go through each one of these in some detail. Variation. The first section of this module was called what? Variation. Okay? There is no evolution without variation. Okay? Variation means what? Different kinds, different alleles. Look at the variation in these snail shells. Not one of them looks the same. Every one looks different. That's one species of snail, and yet look how much variation they've got. Okay? Variation is necessary, because if you don't have variation, if you don't have more than one, right, you can't choose anything, right? So if you go to the shop and there's one kind of ice cream, do you have to select anything? If there's only vanilla, you have to take vanilla. You can't say, I want chocolate. There's no chocolate. There's only vanilla. There's only one choice. So you don't have to select between vanilla, and you have only to take vanilla. Okay? So in other words, there cannot be a selection if there is no choice. Right? So if there's no variation, that is what's giving you the different choices. A lot of variation means you have different choices. Banana, bubble gum, strawberry, and so on. Not just vanilla. And now, suddenly, you can say, I can select which one. Right? You are doing the selection. But you can only select when you have choices. If there's no variation, if there's only one choice, there's no selection. You can't choose. Okay? And that's the basis of natural selection. If there's no variation, natural selection can't work. Because who is going to be fitter and who is going to be not fit? Who is going to be suited and who is not going to be suited? Some have to be suited and some have to be not suited. There has to be variation. And therefore you can choose the one who is suited to the environment. If there is no variation, there's nothing to select. Natural selection doesn't work. So that's why variation is the very first tenet of natural selection. You must have variation. You must have variation, whether it's in size, in the color of your hair, in your facial markings, in the shell. Different traits is what you have to see. Different forms. Variation. Okay? Variation is basically the foundation of natural selection. Right? So if there's no variation, there is no evolution by natural selection. You cannot select anything. Okay? So that's how you understand why variation is important. What about inheritance? Remember, this is what Darwin didn't understand very well. But what he did understand is that natural selection, excuse me, if a trait has to be given to the next generation, a trait being a characteristic. Here, in these two flowers, you have red flower and a white flower. Okay? So that means you have two traits, a red trait and a white trait. Right? So in order to be for natural selection to work on that trait has to be inherited. It has to be passed on to the next generation. Okay? And you have to be able to see it being passed on to the next generation. Okay? So that means it must be consistently passed on. And remember, not all traits are heritable. Okay? Those traits that show weak heritability. In other words, you look at the parents and you look at the offspring and say, but how did that offspring get that? I don't see the relationship between these parents' genotypes and the phenotype of the offspring. What is happening there? When genotype is not mapping onto phenotype, what does it mean? It means the environmental conditions are very strong on that particular trait. Okay? Or that particular gene. So, remember, phenotype is equal to the genotype plus the environment. So, if you have a heritable trait, then you have very little environment. And phenotype and genotype are matching each other. So you can look at the two parents and you can say the offspring is going to look like this, and it does. Whereas, when there's a lot of environment having its way, influencing the genotype, the phenotype you get may not be what you can predict from looking at the parents. So that trait, in that case, would not be heritable. Okay? So natural selection only works on the traits that are heritable. Right? Okay. The third tenet of natural selection is that you have to have a high rate of population growth. Now, Darwin figured this out from Malthus's essay on populations. Malthus was maybe 100 years or so before Darwin, and he came up with the idea of what is a population and the struggle. Okay? If a population grows very high, quickly, then there will always be a struggle between the members of the population. Because why? You get many individuals because of the high growth rate, but what is there? What you need to live, the food you need to eat, the place you need to stay, they're not enough for everyone. So what happens? There's a struggle between the individuals of that population. Okay? There is not enough resources, so there must be a struggle. Okay? Individuals must compete with each other, and the strongest one survives. Okay? That's the struggle that Darwin was talking about. All right. So the one that is the strongest survives. The one that is not strong enough dies. So every generation, because of a high population growth, every generation there must be mortality because of this struggle. Okay? There must always be some losers in this game of evolution. Okay? There can't only be winners. You have to have variation, and some of that variation is going to be what? Winning variation. It's going to allow you to survive the struggle when the population there's so big population. You have to beat the winning one. Okay? But they're also losing variations. Those are the ones that don't survive the struggle. Evolution forgets about them. Okay? And that brings us to the competition. Not all individuals will survive this struggle. Okay? That's the fourth tenet of evolution. Not of natural selection. Not all individuals will survive this heavy struggle. Okay? If an individual has a trait that is well suited for the struggle, okay, then that one will survive better and will also be able to reproduce, to give more to the next generation. Remember, the struggle is not just the struggle to survive to become an adult. It's more than that. Once you're an adult, what is there now? You have to reproduce. Those genes of yours have to go to the next generation. So, what do we have to do? It's not enough to just survive the struggle. You have to survive the struggle and have enough energy to make babies. Okay? That is how you will contribute to evolution. No babies, your line is not evolving. Okay? Evolution is forgetting about you. You must have kids for evolution to happen. All right? So let's look at this case here. In this situation here, you have green beetles which are green and beetles which are orange. All right? So, or brown. Okay? Let's say that's brown. Some of you might say that's brown. Some of you might say that's orange. It doesn't matter. But in this situation here, the struggle for survival happens because the environment, okay, is putting a pressure on that population of beetles. It's a struggle to survive. Why? Because they are predators. These birds are predators. Okay? And they are the environment. They are putting the environment pressure on that population. They are putting the pressure for that population to evolve. How? They are only selecting one color of beetle. Okay? So in other words, there's a variation in those beetles. There's brown and there's green, right? But what is the bird saying? The bird's saying, I love to eat the green ones because they taste better. So what is it doing? It's leaving the brown ones, right? So what happens after a few generations of eating only green or mainly green? Brown starts to get more and more, okay? So the green has a lower chance of surviving because the environment, which is the bird in this case, is eating them, is nailing them one after the other. Whereas the brown, they're surviving. They're not being eaten. So what happens after a while? We can say the brown ones are fitter because they can survive the struggle and they can give their genes to the next generation. Okay? Whereas the green one is is not as fit and is less likely to survive that struggle. And this is where this idea of fitness comes in. We're going to be talking about fitness in a couple of lectures' time. This is where the idea of fitness comes in. Depending on the environment, it can be fit or it can be not fit. Okay? One variant, you need the variation. You have to have at least two choices. In this case, we have a brown and a green, right? You need the variation. Imagine if all were green. The birds can't say the green are my favorite because there's only green, right? Doesn't have anything to select. So we have this concept of fitness coming in. It's a concept that we are going to have to understand very well. All right? On the other hand, these brown beetles, they have an adaptation that allows them to survive. They have an adaptation called this brown color, and this brown color the birds don't like. So the brown are going to have a higher evolutionary fitness than the green. And remember, okay, that even among the brown, not all of them are going to survive. By mistake, a bird can eat a brown one, right? But it's not the preferred one, okay? So eventually, you will get brown ones becoming more and more and more. At this point, I can mention, you also have something called genetic drift. And genetic drift does not care about selection. Genetic drift can take out someone in the population, no matter what color you are, and no matter how fit that color is. We will get to genetic drift soon. Okay, but just bear that in mind. Okay, so in terms of the major developments of human thinking, natural selection, or the idea that things evolve to be perfectly suited to their environment through a process called natural selection, this is now the sixth major development in thinking as a human species. This is equally important as all the other 5 ones were before us, before that. Those 5 ones that I explained to you in 2544, and you saw the list of it earlier, those 5 developments in human thinking set up the stage for someone like Darwin to come with the 6th. Okay? So human beings have been around for 300,000 years, our species. We evolved about that time ago, our modern humans. Okay? Plus, minus. Since that time, you can be sure that the question of life, how did we get here, has been on our minds for a long time. Since that time, there were guys and girls thinking, how did we get here? What is the meaning of our lives? What are we doing here? Who put us here? Those are questions everybody has, including before. So finally, after 300,000 years of humans being around, some guy named Darwin comes and answers this question of questions. What is the meaning of life? Okay? Before this, other clever people, Lamarck, Paley, and so many others, have come and tried to answer, but failed. Only the theory of natural selection succeeds in answering this question. Okay? The meaning of life. Why are we here? We are not here for ourselves. We are here to get our genes into the next generation. Full stop. Okay? So this is the man who changed the way we think about life. So we're going to spend the next lecture talking about the history about this man and his voyage that changed his life and how he changed our lives. That will be in our next lecture. Stay tuned for that.